It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. I'm Samantha Washington. Coming up, we will never feel safe. Grooming survivors speak out as police announce they won't be taking action after a review of their case. They were victims of gangs on Humberside. Police re-examined their case after a Sky News investigation, but after 3.5 years, the matter has been closed.
I still see the same abusers walking around. I'll never feel safe. The constant looking over my shoulder will be there forever.
Also tonight, underprepared, underinsured and under attack. The damning verdict on Britain's armed forces by a former Defence Secretary. Lord Robertson said the welfare budget and government complacency are to blame. His comments come after Sky News learned that military chiefs have been told to find £3.5 billion of savings. Plus, the boss of South East Water says he won't take a bonus this year as he apologised to the thousands of customers who suffered weeks of supply issues over the winter. And travel chiefs speak out over the chaos at European airports. I'll be speaking to the former boss of the EU body behind the controversial new entry and exit system. There's all that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Now, survivors of grooming on Humberside say that they will never feel safe after learning a police investigation into child sexual exploitation is being closed. It is the second investigation launched after Sky News uncovered evidence in the case, leading to a review. The last hope for the women now is that the National Grooming Gang Inquiry team will choose Hull as one of the cities that it will focus on. This report now from our home editor, Jason Farrell.
Operation Conference was investigating claims by 5 women that they'd been abused as teenagers in Hull. The police investigation was reopened after Sky News dug into the case. One victim, we'll call Sarah, told us she had been raped by over 100 men from the age of 13 for over 3 years.
That room, that flat, took my childhood from me. They were coming in sometimes 10 or 11 men wanted to rape me per day.
Another alleged victim we called Anna kept a diary of her abuse, saying she was being controlled like a puppet, and there were school records showing multiple welfare concerns about injuries and sexual exploitation, one saying she knows what they do is harm, but she normalises it. The young women have now been told the 3.5-year re-investigation has been closed. They've given us their responses to the news in messages, which we have revoiced.
It's just held us back this whole time, lingering over us, and it's added to the trauma. We still live in fear.
I still see the same abusers walking around. I'll never feel safe. The constant looking over my shoulder will be there forever.
The alleged survivors all received this letter from Humberside Police, which tells them that they identified 44 potential suspects, but there was not sufficient evidence to reach the threshold for a prosecution. The young women now want a local inquiry in Hull, and it comes at a time when the National Inquiry team is considering which towns should get one. The Grooming Gang Inquiry, headed by Anne Longfield, is expected to select half a dozen towns over the course of the next few months. The women in Hull feel they've been let down. One of the men Sarah identified as her main abuser was convicted of similar crimes in a different town in a completely unconnected case.
Being told the previous officers had missed parts and they were confident they could patch up the mess from the first investigation gave us hope. It's been 10 years since the abuse first started for me. 10 years, 2 failed police investigations.
Anna says one of her abusers also went on to be convicted of abusing other girls.
They were speaking to witnesses 7 years after the abuse, so obviously they couldn't remember dates or detailed information. Although I didn't have much hope the men would all get charged, I did think we would at least get some charges.
Humberside Police commended the courage of those who came forward and says officers followed the evidence professionally with a dedicated specialist team, and says any new information would be investigated. It says victims of sexual abuse should come forward. They will be listened to, and officers endeavour to pursue justice for those affected. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, Lucy Duckworth from the Survivors Trust joins me now. Very good evening to you, Lucy. 2 investigations, and it's possible that the victims here may never see justice. What message have you got for these women?
It's just so terribly awful, isn't it, Samantha, that we are yet again having this conversation. There are victims up and down the country that will be watching this feeling the same complete despair and hopelessness that, you know, for years now we have been saying we need reform and we need a change to our criminal justice system, and we're not seeing it quick enough. We're also putting the burden back on the victims. We're talking about responses and improving responses and reactions. We're not talking about prevention, and we're not talking about intervening with the perpetrators and stopping this crime from happening in the first place. And yet we have the blueprint for that change. We just need to get on and do it.
But you're right. How many times do we need to have this conversation? And there was an independent inquiry into child sex abuse back in 2022, which you contributed to. It highlighted a culture of disbelief and deprioritisation. How is deciding to close this second investigation for these women not sending them a message that this will never happen?
I wish I could answer that with a meaningful answer. It's not. As you said, ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, it ran for 8 years. We were really excited to be part of that because we were guaranteeing the change and reform that we knew back in the 2000s was needed. 3 years on, we've only got 7 of their key recommendations implemented, and that is after a lot of campaigning, because nearly 2.5 years after ICSA concluded, not one recommendation was in place, and it was only from organisations like ours, of which there are many, that came together to campaign to say more needs to be done. We can't just keep having inquiry after inquiry, making recommendations, and then nothing being done. People need accountability, they need support, and more than that, they need the recognition of the lifelong trauma that this affects 14 million adult survivors in the UK today. We can't sit on this anymore.
I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Psychologically, Lucy, what does it do to victims of this kind of abuse when they're repeatedly giving evidence, suspects, the lists of suspects, and investigations are closed? What does that do to somebody on top of what they've already been through, to then feel like they're not being believed, nobody's treating them as if they matter?
I was only talking to someone today who waited 4 years for their trial, and when that came round, it was cancelled and delayed again by another 6 months. In those 4 years, as adults, they want to move on with their life, they want to contribute to society, they want to have jobs, they want to socialise, just like every other human being, and we are deliberately denying them that. The perpetrators don't have their life held in that same way. It is absolutely devastating, and we are re-traumatising people knowingly and willfully every single day, and while we have such an ineffective criminal justice system. And I have spoken to far too many survivors who say that going through the reporting process and going through the trial was actually far worse than the abuse itself, which is a horrific thought, if we really sit with that they would rather have just experienced the abuse and not done anything about it than have gone to the authorities and the people who were there to protect them, because the response they got was so poor.
Lucy, a second investigation was opened because of evidence that Sky News had put together in a report. What do you think, because they've had some media attention here, and we're giving media attention to the fact that it's now been closed, do you think that gives the victims here in the Humberside instance a greater chance of the grooming gangs inquiry perhaps selecting Hull as one of the cities to focus on, or is it irrelevant?
I couldn't possibly talk to that because I'm not part of those conversations, but I do recommend that if that's something that is desired, that they write in and they ask for that to happen. I also really recognise just how many people in Hull, how many of the victims today, and as I said earlier, across the country will be really affected by this today and will be feeling really alone. And I want to really reiterate that they are not. There are many agencies like ours at the Survivors Trust that you can Google where you can get help and you can get specialist qualified help and to realise that you are not alone and you do not need to suffer on this alone. That should be better funded. It shouldn't be the last resort for adult survivors, but currently it is. But there is help out there and there is more that we can do. As you said as well about the media attention, when we come together, when we speak with one voice, we are getting some change. The creation of a child protection authority is an example of that. That should be coming into force next year, which is exactly this sort of case it would prevent, because there would be one department which authorities and statutory services would go to report these cases, and it wouldn't get lost in the many fragments of different areas which are currently responsible for investigating this. But we do need to make sure that better training is in place for the police and for everybody involved in the criminal justice system, and that is something that can easily be done. It's down to the government. We need a creative and frankly radical minister to make it happen.
We might not have had the grooming gangs inquiry if the Prime Minister hadn't have U-turned after Louise Casey's review. What is the best that you think can be hoped for that can come out of it?
I think we've got to, rather than just listen to victims or consult with them, we've got to embed them in the process in every action and everything that inquiry does. Justice and accountability looks very different for every single person. It's a completely unique experience, and it's not for anybody to say what an inquiry should do, what justice looks like, what accountability looks like. People want very different things, but ensuring that as many voices of that is heard as possible, and ensuring that as much learning of the current response is fed into prevention is the most important thing we can do for the next generation.
Lucy Duckworth from the Survivors Trust, thank you very much for speaking to us on the UK Tonight.
Thank you.
Now, a former Defence Secretary and NATO chief has warned that the UK is underprepared for war and accused the government of corrosive complacency when it comes to defence spending. Lord George Robertson says that the country's national security is in peril and Britain cannot be defended with an ever-expanding welfare budget. He's been speaking in Salisbury this evening.
I spent the best part of a year working on the new government's strategic defence review, and I can tell you now, bluntly, the conclusion of all of that work. We are underprepared, we're underinsured, we're under attack, we're not safe. Bluntly, that is the underlying message that we got. And the current conflict in the Middle East has to be a rude wake-up call to this country. On top of what we've already seen in Ukraine, it should remind us in the United Kingdom of our vulnerabilities. And there are many. And in it is a detailed blueprint for what needs to be done. It involves a wholesale transformation of how we guarantee homeland defence and simultaneously deter any adversary from even thinking of attacking us. But it needs money to deliver it. There is a corrosive complacency today in Britain's political leadership. Lip service is paid to the risks, the threats, the bright red signals of danger, but even the promised national conversation about defence can't be started. The cold reality of today's dangerous world is that we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget.
Well, our Security and Defence Editor, Deborah Haynes, is at that event in Salisbury, and I'll be speaking to her to get all her analysis a little bit later in the show. Well, those calls for an increase in defence spending come after the International Monetary Fund cut the UK's growth forecast by more than any other G7 nation. The body says that the UK will be hit hardest by the Iran war, with the conflict raising the prospect of a major energy crisis. Well, the Chancellor is due to land in Washington this evening for the IMF's spring meeting. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has more.
So we've just had the latest forecast from the International Monetary Fund. Basically, every 6 months, they kind of update their forecasts on the state of the economy. And we've just had their update when it comes to the impact of what's happening in Iran, in the Gulf. This is what they were forecasting for economic growth across the G7, so major industrialised economies for this year before the latest update, so before the impact of what's happening in Iran and elsewhere. And look at the UK in particular, so 1.3% growth, not enormously strong, but still, you know, it's kind of like towards the upper end of the pack. Now I'm going to show you these latest forecasts, just through from the IMF. Have a look at this. Same year. So that's all for 2026. And you can see how the UK goes down by 0.5 percentage points. That's a bigger downgrade than any other economy in the world. But worth saying, you know, everyone gets downgraded a bit. Even the US, which is a big energy exporter, and Canada get downgraded a little bit, but just a little bit, whereas the UK is down by 0.5 percentage point. So that's very big. And it's also in line with what the OECD, so another organisation, another kind of economic body, think. UK gets downgraded more than anyone else. And when it comes to inflation as well, so this is the inflation forecast for this year from the International Monetary Fund, the latest figures. And again, you can see, look, there's France at the bottom. There's the UK joint top in terms of our inflation rate expected for this year. So we have one of the highest rates of inflation. We have the biggest downgrade of economic growth, albeit not taking us to the kind of lowest rate of growth. A lot of people are going to wonder, why is it that the UK is being so badly affected? Part of the answer is that a lot of this comes back to energy, and we are a big energy importer. Not obviously, you know, everyone else, many of those other countries are, but nonetheless, it comes down to energy. And this is what the IMF thought was happening to energy prices last time around. That was their forecast for energy prices, things like oil, things like gas. This is what they now think is going to happen. Look at that big spike, so much higher energy prices are forecast now in this latest World Economic Outlook, their update on the state of the global economy. Final thing to note, there's an interesting dichotomy between the impact on countries that are energy exporters. So what this is basically showing is, have there been upgrades or have there been downgrades to their economic growth forecast? That's energy exporters. And you can see, actually, energy exporters do kind of all right out of this because energy prices are higher, so they're making more money out of it. But energy importers get bigger downgrades. And that's basically where the UK is. It falls into this area. As for the Gulf, so those Gulf states, even though they're big energy exporters, they can't get that energy out because of the closure of the strait. And so they're seeing a big downgrade. But all told, essentially the IMF pointing out that this is bad for most countries around the world. But unfortunately, it is particularly bad for the UK.
Ed Conway for us there. Now, still to come on the UK tonight, we're going to have the details as members of an Albanian organised crime gang are jailed after a burglary spree. Also ahead, the boss of South East Water apologises to customers as he is grilled by MPs over water shortages. And we're going to take a look at the record number of British musicians who have entered Rock and Roll's Hall of Fame.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Members of an Albanian organised crime gang have been jailed after a series of high-value burglaries across the UK. The four men stole £1 million worth of valuables, including designer watches and handbags. Police say that they gloated about their crimes. As Sky's Katie Barnfield reports.
Police emergency.
Hi, I've been burgled.
Police emergency.
Hi, I've got an intruder in my house.
Hi, our house has been burgled. He smashed through the back window and took everything.
Terrified victims calling 999 after their homes had been ransacked. At one house, men in balaclavas bundle a safe over a garden fence before making their escape. At least 44 burglaries across Cheshire and beyond, all carried out by the same Albanian crime gang.
We identified that it was a series of burglaries whereby similar types of houses have been targeted. The offenders had acted in the same way when they'd targeted and been involved in those burglaries, so they were generally climbing type offences where they climbed up to a first floor window to gain entrance to the property. And then the items that were targeted within were generally all similar as well: handbags, jewellery, family heirlooms, items that you could easily sell on.
5 Albanian men admitted their involvement in the burglaries, with the gang stealing items worth a total of over £1 million, from jewellery to designer watches.
Please, stay where you are. Stay where you are. Hands down, hands out.
Behind your back, behind your back.
They were caught in a series of raids by Cheshire Police after officers worked with forces across the country.
You're under arrest.
Linking them to burglaries from North Yorkshire down to Warwickshire. When they were arrested, 3 of the men were on the run from immigration officers. On the phone of one of them, Sadorjan Leshi, were pictures of him posing with stolen watches and cash.
Do I believe there's more offences they've committed? Yes, I do. We've got a large amount of property which we've recovered. When we reviewed phone downloads, we've seen items of jewellery that have been put on weighing scales. We have had victims who have come forward and can identify some of that jewellery as being their own, but there will be other pieces that have gone unidentified.
Albanian organised crime groups have long operated in the UK, particularly in the market for smuggling and dealing illegal drugs. But experts say the move into burglaries is a newer development and that understanding how these gangs operate is the key to breaking them down.
The UK can and should do more, but in order for the UK to be more effective, they have to, first of all, fully understand how they operate and that they are different to other organised crime. They very much operate as a kinship network where they are either as part of from the same region or from same family. It makes them very difficult to penetrate because they use fear and intimidation of their own people.
Victims of the gang said they were left feeling exposed and helpless in their own homes, and that it wasn't just the items, but their sense of safety that was taken from them. Katie Barnfield, Sky News.
Now, the government has announced 11 asylum hotels have been closed, with more set to shut in the coming weeks. It comes as part of Downing Street's pledge to no longer use such facilities by 2029. Well, earlier, our politics presenter, Ali Fortescue, spoke to Home Office Minister Alex Norris.
Moving people out of hotel accommodation reduces the impact on those communities, but also reduces pull factors for people to come to this country. Because at the moment, the traffickers say, well, come to the UK, you'll be put up in a hotel, you can work illegally. Well, we're closing those hotels. We're using dignified but more basic accommodation like military sites. I think that's the right balance in tackling this problem for the British public in its balance.
I mean, is it changing the pull factors, though? Because, more than 5,000 people have crossed the Channel this year so far. We're only just at the beginning of the year. We've yet to get through the summer. Last year, we saw nearly the second highest number ever. I mean, have Labour reduced the pull factors? Because that's not being borne out in the numbers.
Well, this is part of a larger programme. We announced in November, we rolled out the first elements in March, the biggest reforms to our asylum system in a generation to reduce that pull factor. You know, accommodation is part of it, illegal working is part of it, and we're introducing measures, particularly in the gig economy. Of course, they take time, but we are seeing the progress that we're seeing, and that's why we're seeing, closures of hotels, which are steps in the right direction.
Still to come on the UK tonight, the boss of South East Water is grilled by MPs. We'll bring you all the details on that. And we'll also be discussing the chaos at European airports. That's as travel chiefs speak out over the controversial new entry and exit system.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more.
Well, let's kick off.
And make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs?
He's coming out! What more do you need?
Now, the boss of South East Water has admitted that his company failed its customers after recent outages left tens of thousands without drinking water. Appearing before MPs for a second time today, Dave Hinton revealed that he wouldn't be taking a bonus this year. Well, Sky's Graham Stoddard joins me now for more on this. Good evening to you, Graham. Nice to see you in the studio. Just remind us how bad these problems were for customers.
Well, it was pretty bad. Just a few months ago, we were actually down there. We were talking to people in Kent and Sussex. They had no running water. They couldn't shower. Some of them couldn't even flush their toilets. Some schools had to close. Some businesses, they were using bottled water to get by. And today in Parliament, there was a select committee hearing essentially asking what was going on, what was happening. And local MPs at the time were asking David Hinton, the chief executive for South East Water, what was going on. They were asking him to appear on camera. That wasn't happening. People were very critical. Some people were even asking, calling on him to resign. The Prime Minister was very critical as well. Now, in January, he finally said that the outages, they were unexpected. They were due to problems at a water treatment works. Today, though, he admitted actually they weren't completely unexpected. That wasn't the case, and he got it wrong. This was him speaking earlier.
There were definitely early warnings at the treatment works that the treatment was not performing as it should. We should have reacted on those earlier warnings quicker and our problem solving around it when we got into that situation was too slow and unstructured. So the problem solving and the reaction is in my belief, and the timing and the early reaction, both reports agree on as a failing on the Pembury treatment works on that particular week.
Graham, there are quite a few people that say his mea culpa just isn't good enough, nor is foregoing his bonus, and are questioning why he's still in a job.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that bonus was due to be £115,000. Yes, he's turned it down, but he hasn't resigned, he hasn't been sacked, so he is still claiming that £400,000 a year salary. Now, the company chairman, Chris Train, was actually at the same hearing. He was asked why there hadn't been any changes of leadership at the top. Those at the top are still at the top. He said that they all had the backing of the board. Both Mr Train and Mr Hinton, they say lessons have been learned, plans have been put in place to minimise future disruption, but they didn't promise that there wouldn't be future disruption. So the people we spoke to, who maybe hadn't showered, well, they may face a similar fate in the future.
And just a quick reminder, some people did get some compensation, didn't they?
Yeah, some people did get compensation. You know, there are, I think it was around £600,000
for businesses.
For businesses, yeah, because some had to close and some were chasing that up. And also the council, as well as South East Water, well, they were putting in place stations of bottled water, which was being handed out as well. So they weren't totally abandoned. And I guess that was one of the things that was coming across in the Select Committee hearing today as well, which at times did get quite tetchy.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. But no compensation for those people who were left smelly from not being able to shower.
No.
Not yet. All right, Graham, for now, thank you. Now, victims of the infected blood scandal are set to receive greater compensation. The government says that an additional £1 billion is going to be made available to those impacted by one of Britain's biggest scandals, while vowing to make it easier for individuals to claim.
The findings of the inquiry must be met with tangible systemic change. I hope what I've set out today goes some way towards showing our commitment to enacting this change. I'd also like to pay tribute to Sir Brian Langstaff, to his team, and everyone who gave testimony to the inquiry for ensuring that that human element of this tragedy remains at the focal point of the inquiry's work. The compensation scheme's most basic purpose is to provide financial recognition of the losses and harms faced by victims, both infected and affected. Beyond this, it must reflect and embody their stories if it is to truly deliver justice, not just for those we tragically lost, but also for those who continue to fight.
Well, next, to a story that we've been following pretty closely this week. British travellers across Europe are continuing to face disruption and confusion following the rollout of the EU's new border checks. Travel organisations are now urging border authorities to use flexibilities, as they're described, to try and reduce the delays that are being caused by that entry-exit system for holidaymakers. Well, I'm joined now by Krum Garkov. He is a former executive at the EU agency responsible for the EES border system. Mr. Garkov, thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. Now, the whole raison d'etre of this new system is that it's supposed to make more modern and more efficient border checks, and yet it's having exactly the opposite effect. What's gone wrong?
Hi, good evening, Samantha. Well, it is true. Entry-exit system is part of the broader efforts of the European Union to make border controls more efficient, both for the travelers and for the border authorities. And I think it's a bit premature to conclude that it doesn't work or makes the things more difficult simply because it was fully rolled out 2 days ago. First of all, I shall say that entry-exit by itself is a big transformational project for border management, and looking at the experience of other countries. And I shall say also that entry-exit is not anything unique for Europe. The similar systems exist in Canada, in Australia, and many other countries. So looking at their experience, there was always a period of, let's call it learning curve for all parties involved to make the things work as expected. So that's what we are facing now. I know about the troubles in some airports, but I believe those are really temporary and very soon things will start moving as expected and as they should be.
And just to give our viewers a sense of what this process involves, it's basically a kiosk which processes people's fingerprints, takes facial images, and that is needed for what, some 200 million passengers who are going to be going into Schengen countries from third countries?
Well, the kiosks are part of it, but it's not they are not the essence of entry-exit system. Basically, the entry-exit system aims one and only thing: to register entries and exits of all third country nationals crossing the external borders of the Union. Essential here is capturing the personal data, alphanumerical and biometric data of the travelers in advance, because mostly the queues that we witnessed on some airports were due to not malfunctioning of the system, but of the fact that people were coming at the border crossing points and were providing their data to the border guards, and that takes time. And the result was queues. For that reason, using the kiosks at the airports, yes, that's one way to relax the pressure at the border crossing points and to reduce the queues, but there are other ways either. And
But there has been a soft rollout, hasn't there, effectively, where the threshold for the number of people that were going to be processed in this way started quite low. I think it was 10% of the applicable passengers, moving up to 35%. But even at only the 10% threshold, it struggled. Why so? What do you think was at fault? Was it inadequate training of staff? Was it airport infrastructure? What was it?
I don't think that there is only one reason of the queues and the difficulties that travelers experience at some airports and border crossing points. It's complex. I cannot judge on each individual case, but I would say that implementation of entry-exit system, as I said before, is very complex transformational project, and it's a complex of new ways of working for the border guards, new ways of working for the authorities that are managing the airports, new ways of crossing the border for the travelers. So it takes time for all those key stakeholders to adjust. But key here, I believe, is the knowledge of the travelers, what they need to do before they reach the border. That's why I mentioned the kiosks, and generally, in a broader sense, pre-enrollment of the data before reaching the border is a key, from my perspective, to reduce the pressure and the queues at this, I would say, initial period of having the system completely rolled out at the borders.
Yeah, it seems eminently sensible that you do some pre-enrolment. You mentioned in one of your earlier answers Canada as an example of getting this right. I remember travelling into Canada and it was seamless about a year ago, but there was some pre-enrolment involved in that. It seems like such a no-brainer. Why are European airports not doing it?
Well, first of all, yeah, Canada is doing it. Australia is doing it, but for them also took some time to get to that point. Initially, they faced similar challenges as we see now in Europe. Now, it's not so much about the airport authorities. It is a legal possibility that is set in the legislation that governs the entry-exit system, and it's up to the EU member states to open as many as possible channels for pre-enrollment. One of them, definitely, taking the experience from the successful implementation of common EU visa policy, could be using external service providers, which already for 20 years provide services for visas. The same they can do for pre-enrollment, and in that case, pre-enrollment will be done far before and beyond the borders. And once the travelers arrive at the borders, their data will be already in the system. Therefore, they will go much faster and seamlessly through the border checks. And there might be also other channels. Yeah.
The airports can't carry on like this, can they? And there's going to be a big argument between the airlines and the airports. How long do you think it will take for them to sort it out so that this runs more smoothly?
I would say not too long, for a very simple reason. First, there is a learning curve, as I said, and I think we are going very fast through it, simply because EU member states, airports, carriers put a lot of effort to prepare for the full rollout. And of course, no one can be completely prepared for the reality on the ground. So there are adjustments that needs to be made. But also, just to remind how the entry-exit system works. Actually, once a third country national is registered in the system with its personal data, the personal file of that person is kept for 3 years. So next time when he comes at the border, there will be no need to pre-enroll or to provide any data. Yeah, he can go straight to the border crossing points, and the check will be carried out much faster. So this is inevitable period of time at the beginning to accommodate in the system sufficient data that will then facilitate faster border crossing for everyone.
OK, your optimism is noted. Krumgarkov, thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, let's return now to that warning from Lord Robertson that the UK is underprepared for war. The former Defence Secretary accusing the government of corrosive complacency when it comes to military spending. Well, he has been speaking in Salisbury tonight, and as I said earlier, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is there for us. So good evening to you, Deborah. This is pretty excoriating from somebody who will undoubtedly have known that his stinging criticism would reverberate.
Yes, and he was clearly speaking with a heavy heart when it came to the criticism that he levied at the Labour government, a government that actually appointed him to be the lead author of last year's Strategic Defence Review. And you just got this sense that it was born out of sheer frustration and sheer concern about the urgency of the hour and the failure so far as Lord Robertson is concerned, of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and John Healey and the rest of the cabinet to match with action the very strong rhetoric they have been given ever since the Defence Review was published. And that really came across loud and clear. He made a couple of times, he made this reference to a time frame of the end of the decade for when NATO believes that Russia could be ready to launch military action against the alliance. He said that is not much time. He said that should be a sobering fact for all of us. He even said that should be scary. It should be frightening. We should all realise that if the UK fails to make, and he was very clear, these are difficult, painful choices, but choices that he believes need to be made, then we are underprepared and we are vulnerable. He talked about how deterrence is far cheaper than going to war, and actually made the extraordinary reminding fact that it was 2016 when the UK last paid off the final debt that it had incurred from the Second World War, a war that the UK was on the winning side of. He was making the case that in terms of the politics around this, there is no more time for the luxury of mudslinging between politicians, and instead defence needs to be an all-of-country, an all-of-party endeavour. He also talked about how, in terms of spending priorities, there clearly needs to be, in his mind, a shift away from what he described as an unsustainably increasing welfare bill. He says that we spend 5 times more on welfare than we do on defence, and he asks, is that really the right priority given the scale of the threat? And he talks specifically about the Iran war and how this needs to be a wake-up call for the country. And he cites the Prime Minister repeatedly in his speech, the Prime Minister's own words talking about the need to strengthen defences, but then says that there is the wherewithal to achieve that is just missing. The clear message from Lord Robertson to the government tonight is that you have to meet actions now. You have to meet your words with actions. That means rapidly increasing defence spending, also transforming the way this country thinks and fights. He says there's no time now for the lethargic thoughts of the post-Cold War era. Instead, the UK needs to be on much more of a war-fighting mindset, like in Ukraine. And finally, he says that this is a warning. Time is ticking out. And he actually sort of says, you know, the clock is ticking on reacting to his warnings tonight and actually making those changes and also making what he described as this national conversation. The Prime Minister called for that 18 months ago. Lord Robertson is certainly hoping that he is starting it right now.
Very sobering message, Deborah. For now, thanks. Still to come on the UK tonight, we're going to be taking a look at the record number of British acts who've been inducted into Rock and Roll's Hall of Fame. And we'll also have all the latest sport for you as one Premier League manager announces his departure.